Algebra 1, Sensei Learning System, Lesson 19, the quadratic formula. Given a quadratic, let's say in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, the solution for this would be x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b again squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. So for number 1, let's identify a, which is the coefficient on x squared, 2, b, the coefficient on x, which is 5, and c, the constant, which is negative 3. So x would equal the opposite of b, so opposite of b, there's the opposite, and there's b right there, plus or minus the square root of b again, there's the b, to the second power, minus 4, then times a, which is 2, and c, which is negative 3, all over 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, now the opposite of positive 5 would end up being negative 5, plus or minus the square root, 5 to the second power, positive 5 to the second power is positive 25, negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, and negative 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. So, positive 24. So let's put positive 24 there. 2 times 2 is 4. Now, let's combine those like terms, the 25 and 24. We get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 4. The square root of 49 is 7. So this plus or minus 7 over 4. This gives us a split into two pieces. One piece is x equals negative 5 plus 7 all over 4, whereas the other piece will be negative 5 minus 7 all over 4. So on the left side, a negative 5 and a positive 7 make 2 over 4. If we divide these both by 2, we would get x equals 1/2 as a solution. Well, I guess that was hard to see. Sorry for that. Okay. Next one. A here is 5, B is negative 8, and C is the constant 3. So x will be the opposite of negative 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 to the second power minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is positive 3, all over 2 times a, which is 5. Okay. The opposite of negative 8 becomes positive 8, plus or minus the square root. Negative 8 to the second power will give us positive 64. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20, and negative 20 times 3 is negative 60. Okay, got it. And then 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, from here, we'll have 8 plus the square root. 64 minus 60 will give us 4, and everything's over 10. The 4 will simplify to a 2 all over 10. This will split up into two pieces. We will have an x with an 8 plus 2 all over 10, and an x equals 8 minus 2 all over 10. 8 plus 2 is 10 over 10. 10 divides evenly into 10 and gives us a 1. Okay, over here, 8 minus 2 gives us a 6 over 10. Both can be divided by 2, giving us an x equals 3 over 5. 3 over 5. Next, number 3. Okay, for this one, A is an understood 1, B is an understood negative 1, and C is the constant negative 20. So x would equal, and following the quadratic formula again, here, the opposite of B, which is negative 1, plus or minus the square root of negative 1 to second power, that's B, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and times c, which is negative 20. And that's all over 2 times a, which is 1. Okay, now we'll have the opposite of negative 1, which is positive 1, plus or minus the square root. Negative 1 squared gives us positive 1, and negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, times negative 20 gives us positive 80. So that'll be positive 80. And 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so this will be 1 plus 80 gives us the square root of 81, all over 2. The square root of 81 ends up being 9, and that's all over 2. This breaks into two pieces. X will equal 1 plus 9 all over 2, and x will equal 1 minus 9 all over 2. For the x equals 1 plus 9, we get 10 over 2. 2 divides evenly into 10 and gives us 5. For this problem right here, positive 1 and negative 9, different signs will subtract, and we'll get negative 8 divided by 2. That divides evenly into a negative 4. Next, we have a is 6, b will be 7, and c will be 2. So we'll have the opposite of b, which is 7, plus or minus the square root of b, which is 7 to the second power, minus 4 times 6, which is a, times 2, which is c. Let's move that over a little bit. Okay. And that's all over 2 times a, which is 6. Okay, so let's begin. The opposite of a positive 7 gives us negative 7, plus or minus the square root of 7 squared, which is 49. Then we have a negative 4 times 6, which is negative 24, times 2, which is negative 48. And 2 times 6 gives us 12. Okay, now 49 take away 48 will leave us 1. So we have a negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 1 all over 12. And the square root of 1 will give us 1. That's over 12. Now this splits into two pieces. X will equal negative 9 plus 1 all over 12. And x will equal negative 9 minus 1 all over 12. Well, the negative 9 and the positive 1 makes a negative 8 over 12. Both can be divided by 4, thus giving us x equals negative 2 all over 3. The negative 9 and the negative 1 come together and gives us negative 10 all over 12. Both the numerator and denominator can be divided by 2, thus giving us negative 5 over 6. Number 5. Here, the a term, which is in front of the x, is 1. The b term, in this case, is negative 4. And there is no constant, so that means the c is 0. So, x will equal the opposite of b, which is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 to the second power, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c, which is 0. And that's all over 2 times a, which is 1. The opposite of a negative 4 makes positive 4, plus or minus, and the square root here. Negative 4 squared gives us 16, and negative 4 times 1 times 0 is 0, so that we only have 16 here. So the square root of 16, over 2 times 1, which is 2. So the square root of 16 is 4, so we have 4 plus or minus 4 all over 2. So this splits into two pieces. We'll have x equals 4 plus 4 over 2, and x equals 4 take away 4 over 2. 4 plus 4 will be 8 over 2. That divides evenly and gives us 4. 4 take away 4 over 2 gives us 0 over 2, and 0 over 2 is simplified to 0. Once again, number 6, a is positive 2, b is the understood 1, and c is equal to 0. So our x will equal the opposite of b, and b is 1, plus or minus the square root of b again to the second power, minus 4 times a, which is 2, and c, which is 0, all over 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, so the opposite of positive 1 will give us negative 1, plus or minus the square root. These cancel because this is being multiplied by 0, and 1 squared is 1. And 2 times 2 is 4. So the square root of 1 gives us 1, so we have negative 1 plus or minus 1 all over 4. This splits into two pieces. One piece would be x equals negative 1 plus 1 over 4. The other piece will be negative 1 minus 1 all over 4. The negative 1 and positive 1 will add together to become a 0 over 4. That simplifies the 0. The negative 1 and negative 1 will combine to become a negative 2 over 4. And if we divide these both by 2, this will give us a negative 1/2. Next, number 7. Let's skip to number 8. Number 8, we have a is 25, b, which is missing because it will be on the x term, is 0, and c is negative 4. So we would have here that x would equal the opposite of b, so opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, minus 4 times a, which is 25, times c, which is negative 4. And that's all over 2 times 25. Okay, well, this cancels, this is 0, and this cancels, so we'll have negative 4 times 25, which is negative 100, times negative 4, which is positive 400. So we'll have the square root plus or minus the square root of 400, and that's all over 50. Well, the square root of 400 will be 20, so that'll be plus or minus 20 all over 50. So that breaks us into two answers. X equals 20, positive 20 over 50, and x equals negative 20 over 50. If I divide this by 10, we'll get x equals 2/5. Divide this by 10, we'll get x equals negative 2/5. Number 9. A is equal to 1, understood 1 in front of x squared. B is 0, and c is negative 1. Here we have x equals the opposite of b, so opposite of 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 0 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and times c, which is negative 1. And that's all over 2 times 1, which is a. Okay, 0 cancels, this 0 cancels, and we're left with negative 4 times positive 1 times negative 1, which gives us positive 4. So this ends up being the plus or minus square root of 4. And 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, made my line a little long. But the square root of 4 is 2, so we have plus or minus 2 over 2. This breaks into two answers. X equals positive 2 over 2, and x equals negative 2 over 2. The first answer ends up being 1, whereas the other answer ends up being negative 1.